Okay. I guess we're ready to start. So thanks everyone for coming to this evening with ChatGPT. So in order to start, I'll give a very brief introduction to the event tonight. And I guess introductions have to start with introductions. So this is us. Who are we? We are the computational linguistics group at the University of Groningen. We are based at the Faculty of Arts. And we go under the name of GroNLP. NLP stands for Natural Language Processing, which of course has to do with what we're going to discuss tonight. That's all of us right now. There have been questions about the cow. It's a secret. I can't disclose it. I've been telling stories to specific people who have asked, but of course they're not true. If you want to know the real story of the cow, you have to join the group. Which, you should, considering how cool and hot this topic is. Just as a disclaimer, we have nothing to do with the farmers. We're just GroNLP, cow secret. We might disclose it, maybe. So what do? We've been, of course, busy for years and years on developing and studying and researching language-based technologies. And language-based technologies also in terms of dialogues and chatbots, and so go back a very long way. So we've been busy with things for a long way, and people in the field have been busy with things for a long way. And I have a slide that shows a system from 1966, which was an interactive system where people could ask for sort of psychological support and advice. And this system was called ELIZA. And it's all completely rule-based and template-based. What does that mean? That if a user would input a word, any word, then the system would pick that up and put it in a different sentence that was pre-made. It was extremely simple. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to zoom across 40 years and get us to 2015. And of course, in these 40 years, there's been a lot of evolution, but the last 10 years have been really major, and we can talk about that further. You can ask us questions about that. And in 2015, there were developments based on something, you'll see some examples, called neural networks, that were able to produce text that looked like Shakespeare. And we were all like, wow, this is incredible. The progress we are making as a field is incredible. And if you look at it, if you can read it, it might be a little small for people in the back. It's Shakespearean, but it's not that good. It doesn't have, some sentences are not really fully finished, but we were all like, wow, such progress in our field. And I jump to February 2019, and we're talking about OpenAI, which is the company that also made ChatGPT. And they made a previous version, and they decided not to release it because it might have been too dangerous for the general public, for everyone to use. And that previous version was generating text. You could give it some input, and it could generate text. And at some point, they decided that it was okay to show it to the public. And you probably have not seen it, and maybe only some of you have followed these developments. But I want to show you just one single example of what they were really afraid of. Okay, so what kind of text they thought this model could generate that was so similar to what humans could generate that was worrying. So I prompted this model saying the University of Groningen is, and it continued, and we will explain to you in a moment how it continued. He said, is looking for candidates. A PhD in applied sciences that not qualify. Qualifications in English in this range may be preferred. Full details are found below. A university teaching position requires that you speak Norwegian. So if you read this, we laugh. But the company, was worried that a model that would generate this kind of text was dangerous. And we laugh. And why do we laugh? Because is it bad? It's not that bad. At that point, we were like, wow! You know, forget the model that made Shakespeare. This is incredible. And this was 2019. So unless you've been living in a cave, and I don't think so, I'm sure you've heard of the most recent developments, and specifically ChatGPT. And especially if you're here, I guess you've heard of it. So ChatGPT was developed again by OpenAI, and it came out at the end of November. Now, the next day, this was one headline. OpenAI invites everyone to test ChatGPT, a new AI-powered chatbot with amusing results. Same day, OpenAI's new chatbot can explain code and write sitcom scripts, but is still easily tricked. A couple of days later, AI bot ChatGPT stuns academics with essay writing skills and usability. Another few days, machine-made poetry is here. ChatGPT is fluent, clever, dangerously creative. ChatGPT, I'm not going to attempt my Dutch pronunciation here, but you can see it, but it's again about stimulating creativity. But then this was just a couple of days later, and then a few days later, like, okay, we should be careful with it. And yet somebody's going, nah, it's for outside. So for the non-Dutch speakers, like, you know, it's a bit boring. Then a few days later, still somebody's saying, wrote my AP English essay and I passed. This was just before Christmas. Right at the beginning of the new year, Top AI Conference bans ChatGPT in paper submissions. And why that matters? Educational friend, or foo. And just a couple of days ago, the NL Times, Dutch students using ChatGPT to finish homework, teachers aren't noticing. And then, from yesterday, Nick Cave got a little bit disappointed at ChatGPT attempt at making a song in his own style, and he says, it sucks. So is ChatGPT good or is it not good? What can it do? It's all over the places, though. It's really all over the places. And still, from yesterday, this is from the NRC, this is, you know, ChatGPT is our new colleague, and it's here to stay. And it is here to stay. And this is why we thought it's a very good idea that we, as experts, scientists in this university, provide an evening where we try to tell you what we know about it. And we're here for you to ask questions as well. So the program for tonight is like this. After this, we're going to see what it is that it can do, it cannot do. We're going to go through lots of examples in various ways. And you will appreciate its capabilities. Then we'll go a little bit deeper into seeing how it works. Why is it like that? How can it actually produce language like that? And then we'll have a break. In the break, you're more than welcome to use some laptops that we have prepared to try ChatGPT for yourself. But in the break, you're not welcome to access the snacks and the drinks. Those are for later. Those we'll have. Those we'll have at the end of all of our presentations. So after the break, which will be about 15 minutes, we'll go back and we'll talk about some ethical implications and the impact that the existence of this tool will have in our work, on our lives in general, as a community, as a research community, but also just as a society, because, as said, it's there to stay. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session and discussion, and I want to specify that this event is live streamed, but we'll stop the streaming at the Q&A session. So the Q&A session will not be streamed and will not be recorded. Eventually there will be drinks, and the drinks and the snacks are offered kindly by the Faculty of Arts, that is the faculty where we work, and also by the Jantina Tamme School for Digital Society, Technology, and Artificial Intelligence. Before we move on to see some examples, there's one point that I really wanted to have in the introduction, and I really want to get straight. Because this, I think, is the core question that I've been asked by people who are not in the field. So, is ChatGPT the new Google? This was also a headline. It's not only a headline, it's a question that we get all the time. And I really care to stress this, that at least now, no, it isn't. It isn't. ChatGPT and Google, in terms of the search engine, are two different things, are really two different objects, are two different concepts, okay? We can talk about it more, but it's really important that this message gets through. Tell all your friends, tell everyone. Google, in terms of Google search, is a search engine. It will retrieve existing documents for you. ChatGPT is not a search engine, doesn't have access to sources while it's producing the text. It's just making up text that, yes, it has learned, we'll see how, on a large amount of data, but it's not retrieving any documents for you. It's generating language. Yeah, I think this is a really important point to take home. What it generates, how much, how it can do it, we're going to see it next.
Thank you, Malvina. Do you hear me through the mic like this? Is that okay? Yeah? Yeah, I can do this. So this is better. So yeah, my part is just basically to show you many examples of what it can and cannot do. And I think we should just dive right into it and say, okay, is ChatGPT good at composing stories? And we can just, ask it to tell us a story. So for example, I can ask it, tell me a story in which Rik, me, scored a winning goal in the World Cup final for the Netherlands. Yeah, it's of course a bit of fan fiction, but still. And then we make it a bit more complicated. So, this first sentence would already be quite a task, I think, for any automatic system. But then he said, okay, he was assisted by Johan Cruyff, and Vincent van Gogh was there, and Darth Vader was the goalkeeper, and Obama was the referee. This is just for fun, but it's also, all these names play different roles, right, in the story, and the model has to keep track of this. So let's see what it does. So it begins with, it was a historic day for the Netherlands. Well, sounds good. They faced off against their rivals. Yes, the whole country was on edge. Yeah, this is all building to a nice story. And then, the Netherlands were led by their star player, which is me. I didn't ask for that, but sure, I can be the star player, yeah. And then, as the game began, both teams were neck and neck, and the tension was palpable, etc., etc. Well, this is all very good, but this is not the full story yet. So, it was still generating. And then, it goes on, but with just minutes remaining in the game, Rik made his move, blah, blah, blah. Johan Cruyff actually gave him the ball. Yes, it actually should do that. Darth Vader was being intimidating in the goal. And then, I almost scored, and then, Vincent van Gogh appeared, and he distracted everybody with his flamboyant painting style. I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, and then of course I scored because I asked for that, and then we won, and the referee Obama actually confirmed the goal. Yes, we did it. So, this is a great story. So to me, this was already very impressive. This was way better than anything we had before. Now, and of course you can see that all the roles that I asked about, it actually got them exactly right. And, this is not easy. So this was really very impressive. But we can even ask it to be more impressive, really. So then I asked it, please turn this, this whole text, and this is the only thing I said. I only said this. So the model has to understand what this is, even, into a poem of 12 lines. Well, that seems pretty hard, right? Well, let's see. And this is what it output. So the crowd roars, the tension high, as the Netherlands and rivals vie. It means compete. I also didn't know, but so that is. But the whole thing is just it's very impressive, right? It is amazing. It rhymes. It gets the whole story right. All the names are still there, and they all do the right thing. That is, this is where I was really, really impressed. So. And then I thought, well, this is all still in English, right? So then I said, well, actually, I would like you to do this in Dutch as well. A different poem, but on the same topic, and make sure it still rhymes. Famous last words, because as you see here, it really did not rhyme at all. Really, it was. De kraut bruist, de spanning hoog. Als Nederland en rivalen strijden om de vlag. No. So, for non-English languages, it's actually a lot worse, it turns out. And in this case, it even seems to just literally translate, because, it even says, het doel wordt bevestigd. It's just, the goal was confirmed. You would never say this in Dutch. That is very weird. So, no, it's not good at everything, get this straight. Then there's something that I want to show you, and that is, this previous example was just for fun. But I think this tool can be very useful for us researchers or for us academics, really. So for example, you have to write a paper and the deadline is close and it's evening and you're tired and you're just writing out words and it doesn't flow as nicely anymore. So you have this sentence in your introduction. Previous papers did not look into this problem yet. I mean, it's not wrong, but it's not a nice, formal, eloquent style. So we just ask ChatGPT to rewrite this. And then it does this. Previous studies have yet to examine this study in depth. Whoa, that is a lot better. And then, I'm not saying that you should, take this sentence and just copy-paste it into your paper, but it will help you, in rewriting. And, you can use that sort of a brainstorming tool even, to give you certain ideas. So now I want to look into something that ChatGPT also does well. Spoiler alert, but it's very good at mimicking a certain style. So first we have to start with some sort of general text. And so we ask it to summarize all achievements of Obama in 5 sentences. And it does this quite well. This is maybe not that impressive, but it's very good. He was the president, he implemented Obamacare, he oversaw killing bin Laden, the relationships with Cuba improved, and he addressed climate change. We can debate if these are actually his most important accomplishments, but this is already impressive that it came up with this. Now I ask it to write this previous text, into a sort of different style, and I ask it to write it as if it was part of the Bible, so the King James Bible. And it gives us this, which, it's pretty good, I think, And lo, there came a man named Barack who ascended the throne. That is, and it even ends with amen. That's just amazing. Of course, it uses a bit of strange words to give this impression that is this style. But it also knew that, at that phase, there were no presidents, so he had to ascend to the throne. And, Osama bin Laden was a great enemy of the land. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So yes, it does this very well. Now we can also ask, write this summary as if a 6-year-old actually wrote this. I think, well, that might be quite a difficult task. Because, how would the model know? Because there were not many of those, online typing things where it can learn from. And then it outputs this, which, again, I think it's amazing. It's just as, he was the president. He made it so more people can have healthcare. The soldiers came back. He got the bad guy. He made friends with Cuba. And he helped the earth. Wow, that is, I don't know so many 6-year-olds, but this seems very, very good, actually. We can take it a bit further even, we say, well, now write it as if a toddler would say it. There are definitely no toddlers online, right? Are there? So, yeah. So, Barack Obama president, man. He make healthcare for more people. Yeah. Soldier friends are back, and Cuba land. Yeah, and magic. Yeah, that is just, that is great stuff. And at this point I thought, okay, I will take it to the max, basically. So I said, now write it as if a baby would say it. I said, and that does this. that was, to me, also very unexpected. I had no idea that this was, that it could do this. But I mean, it's true. This is how a baby would say it. Like it's not wrong. No, this was amazing. Yeah. Okay. So this was part of the fun stuff. But now we also have to talk about a more serious issue, and that is this model actually reliable or not? So say we want to learn something about a certain topic, and we just want to ask this model, so ChatGPT, questions. So, like I thought of, a very difficult topic where I want to learn about, and then of course it's always quantum physics. So I said, okay, briefly explain quantum physics to me, and also give me 3 sources with formal citations. Well, this is quite a difficult task. And it outputs this, quantum physics is a branch of physics deals with behavior, at the atomic and subatomic level. Well, okay, good. Fundamental theory, blah, 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 small scale, wave-particle duality, superposition, entanglement. Yeah, for a brief explanation, this seems pretty good to me. Of course, I'm not an expert. But of course, the interesting thing is the sources. It actually gives back books, with years and with authors, and also tells me why, those books are interesting, which I didn't ask for, but great. And then I went to look, do these books actually exist? And they do. Like, these are actual books, and these are the actual authors of those books. So I was like, well, this is an amazing resource if you want to learn about a certain topic. You can just ask it, and it will give you books, and it will explain everything. This is amazing. However, what if now I ask something that is just totally untrue? Like this did not happen. I mean, I asked for it to be explained how Nicolas Cage was the first president of the US, but of course, this never occurred. So, like, what will it output now? You can sort of see where I'm going with this. Of course, it does the same thing, but it totally makes it up. So it says actually that it was the first president, and it was unclear how he became president, which, sure, because he didn't. And, there were even some powerful figures involved in the government. Conspiracy theory. But then, so what I find really funny is that these books are all, and these articles, they don't exist, right? And it totally made it up. Like, there are page numbers and everything, but it's totally made up. And, that is quite funny that it actually does this and that it's wrong. But it immediately makes you think about the previous example, about the quantum physics, where I thought, wow, this is so useful. And the books actually existed, but the first 3 sentences, I wasn't an expert. I didn't really know if that was true. So now this makes me question, all previous answers of ChatGPT. Can we really trust it? Is it really reliable? Apparently not. It can be just bullshitting you. Then the second part where we're also interested in is, does it perform any sort of reasoning, internally maybe, or anyhow, or so what we humans think would need reasoning to solve, for example. So we can ask it, okay, so we basically ask it to pick the odd one out. This is of course like a famous joke type. Okay, I'll give you 4 words, and there's one, that really doesn't belong. In this case, of course, the answer is very easy, right? Parsley, basil, dill, and mayonnaise. I'm not going to ask you. It's clear. The answer is mayonnaise, because the others are herbs. And, it gets it. It totally understands. Like it even gives the right explanation, even though I didn't ask for an explanation. It totally understands. Well, okay, great. Let's try a second one. Okay, which word does not belong with the others? So is it inch, ounce, centimeter, or yard? Does anybody know? This is a bit harder one. Yeah. I can spoil the answer. So the answer is actually ounce, because ounce measures weight, and the others measure length. Right? So that should be the answer. And ChatGPT does not get this at all, and even gives a wrong explanation, and it really has no sense of these terms at all, apparently. So this is clearly wrong. So, did it really reason about, in the previous question, or did it just give a bullshit answer that turned out to be right this time? We don't know. So yeah, this is also a bit worrying. So, in general, I think you have probably seen many, many great examples of ChatGPT. And it is very impressive. It is amazing at many things. But there are also lots of silly weaknesses, and I think it's also important to show those now here. So, for example, I can ask you a sort of simple question, okay, I will give you a sentence, and you have to reverse it letter by letter, okay? And this should be very easy for a computer to do, That this should not give any trouble, Of course, I already gave away that it's bad, but, and then it does this. It is like Rik van Noord means close, but no, that is it's completely wrong. And then I say, okay, well, let's see if you understand that you were wrong. So, okay, now you reverse your answer letter by letter and see if you got it right. And it just makes it worse. It's in capitals now. I don't know. Yeah, and it's still totally wrong. Yeah. And then I ask it, are you good at this, at reversing sentences? And of course it says yes. I'm very good at this. I can do it with high accuracy, but you can't. No. And then I thought, okay, it's bad. Maybe these letters are a bit hard. Maybe it works on word level or something. That's too complicated. I can ask it, do this on word level. So it's the same sentence, but now word for word. Now, it barely even tried. Name my is Rik van Noord and computational linguist I'm. That's clearly so bad. Then I thought, okay, you can't do this. Sure, now write a sentence that just ends with the word computational. The field of natural language processing is closely related to computational linguistics. So close. Still bad. Also, what I find personally interesting is riddles and jokes. So these things are kind of set up often to trick humans. So I also thought, can we also trick a computer? So this is one of my favorite jokes/riddles. So you are running a marathon, you pass the person in second place, and what place are you in now? You are still in second place. The intuition is first place for many people. Maybe not for you, but it's. And so I asked the model this, and it says first place. I was like, yes, fooled you. And then, so yesterday I was going over these examples. So this was from the beginning of December, and I thought, okay, I can ask it again and see what it says. And then it gets it all of a sudden. It's the exact same question. So the model gets updated in the meantime, and it also gets updated based on your input. So the sentences you ask, and it fails. The people behind this model actually get these, and I also tweeted about it. So maybe they got it from there. I mean, didn't exactly go viral, but still, there might be some intern, that is just scrolling through Twitter and then just listing these examples. Yeah, so it actually learned. So how you would update such a model, that will be explained later by Gabriele. But it does happen, and it does actually get better. Yeah, this is a famous Dutch riddle in Dutch. De moeder van Jan heeft 3 zonen, kwik, kwek en dan, je moet Jan zeggen. And it does. It gets it, yeah. So I was like, yeah. So, okay, for the English people, the mother of John has 3 sons, Huey, Dewey, and Louis. Oh, shit. So it doesn't get it in English. So there isn't really any understanding of this sort of question type going on. It probably just saw the Dutch one somewhere, and then, it just copied this, but it never really understood, right? So I thought, maybe ChatGPT is funny. That would be nice if it has some sort of fun output. So I said, okay, explain why this sentence is funny. This is my stepladder. I never knew my real ladder. This is a stepladder, so people understand the joke. But I mean, it's clear why this is funny to humans, of course, Okay. It starts off good. The sentence is funny because it's a play on words. The speaker's talking about stepladder, type of ladder, blah, blah, blah. I also say I never knew my real ladder, implying that I never knew the actual father. Oh, no. Making a pun on the word ladder? No. The unexpected double meaning of the word ladder creates the humor. No. Not that is not what's going on, ChatGPT, so no. So I thought, okay, it's bad at this, but maybe it can generate jokes. Maybe it's better at that. Explaining jokes is always difficult because they're no longer funny if you do that. So sure. So I thought, okay, tell me a joke about linguists and football. So it says this: why did linguist get kicked off the football team? Because he kept making verb conjugation instead of tackles. You are laughing, but it's not funny. No, this is not funny. You are laughing because it's not funny, but this is not. No. No, this is, I mean, it clearly understands what a joke looks like, and it incorporates the topics of the joke, but it is not fun. It's just not funny. It doesn't understand what a joke is. Yeah? So with this sort of disappointing joke, I want to summarize what we saw here, and that is, so as you saw, it has many, many great strengths. It's fluent, it's coherent, and it's very convincing, creative. It can tell many nice stories. It can do this in many different styles, really. It can answer your questions, and it can do coding. It can do so many things. However, what the problem is with all these things is that you can never really trust its output. It's not really reliable, and that is because it doesn't really generalize. It's not always truthful. It can just make things up. It can just start bullshitting you. And also doesn't know that it's doing this. So these are all, of course, big issues with this current model. So I think for me, what the takeaway message is that it can be an extremely useful tool if, and only if, you can easily verify its answers. Thank you.
All right. So now we move forward to the part where we talk about how this system works. Some of you may have heard that people inside big tech companies basically teach these AI systems how to do these kind of things, how to work with language. So what do we mean by teach exactly? Is that this system actually learns something, okay? So I want to start this description by a theory of learning that comes from one of the very founders of the field of artificial intelligence that said learning is like a cake, basically. There are very fundamental components in a cake, and there are just things that you add up to make it better, but that are not, let's say, mandatory, that are not what makes a cake a cake. So the first component is the cake itself. So it's the base of the cake, let's say. And this is what you're going to actually eat, right, in a cake. So it's the fundamental component that makes a cake what it is. So Yann LeCun says the fundamental component of what makes learning what it is learning from patterns, okay? Understanding how things work and how things operate. So imagine that you wanted to teach to an alien to cook a dish of pasta, okay? So before teaching this alien how to do it, you would have to teach the alien what are tomatoes probably, right? Or what is pasta, or what is water? Maybe they don't have it, right? So this kind of very low-level understanding of how things are, for example, that water, if you warm it up, it boils, this is learning from patterns. And this is what unlocked this revolution that led to ChatGPT, basically. I also want to stress the fact that this is not an advance that happened in one day, but this kind of findings, this kind of theorizing, has been going on for decades at this point. And it's an incremental work that led to this kind of result. So the second thing is the icing. So the icing is still a fundamental component in a cake, but is not as fundamental as the cake. And Yann LeCun says the icing is learning from examples. So once that you understand how things work, once that the alien knows how things work, you will have to show to this alien how to make the pasta, actually, right? How to cook. And the alien, just by looking at you cooking, is gonna understand how to do it, basically. That's how we humans learn a lot during our childhood also, right? And finally, the final step is learning by trial and error. Okay, so this is a more advanced level of learning, and that's why we define it as the cherry. So it's something that is really nice to have, that really makes the cake complete, but that is not like the body of the cake, like all that it is. And this is what we do all the time as adults, let's say, in the world. We learn from feedback from mistakes and good choices in our life, basically. So why I decided to present this is that all these three components really live together inside ChatGPT. So ChatGPT used all these three modes of learning to get where it is. So let's talk about what ChatGPT is, finally. So we call these kind of systems language models. So very simply, a language model is a system that, being provided with some text, is able to predict what comes next, okay? So let's see an example here. We have this text, hello ladies, and does someone have an hypothesis of what could come next at this point? Someone? Okay, gentlemen. So let's say we convert this text in a representation that the model can understand. I'm not going to go in detail to that. And we pass this representation through this model, okay? I'm going to stay very abstract for now. What this model produces as a result are probabilities, basically. So imagine that you have the vocabulary containing all the words in the English language, for example, and this model is going to tell you, I'm 90% sure that gentleman comes next. I'm 1% sure that the next word is badgers, for example. I don't know. Other words, okay? And so what could we do at this point? We could pick the most likely word, which is gentleman, and repeat the process. And now we're going to have hello, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to ask the model what comes next, and we just keep going. That's exactly how ChatGPT operates, okay? Now, how are these models built, basically? So these models are basically a stack, a pile of different blocks that are all the same. Here I call it transformer block. This is like jargon, let's say, of our field. But what I want to convey is that these blocks are all exactly the same. And what these blocks do is simply to take some low-level information, for example, this raw text that you pass to the model, and to convert it into a higher-level contextual information. So what comes out of this block is an information that takes into account all the context of the sentence, for example. Repeat this for many, many steps throughout the model, you get a very high-level abstract information of what is going on inside this sentence, okay? So also here, what I want to stress is that both the block and by extension the whole model are mathematical functions. So you can imagine it as a function. So what this tells us is there's no symbolic process involved. There's no access to a server, a database of data that is done when the model predicts. If you ask the model what date is today, it cannot check a calendar. It cannot go on Wikipedia and check, okay? This is not how this model operates. The model does this only internally based on parameters that were learned, okay? And these parameters were learned by looking at all these things, by looking at Wikipedia and other things, but not by having access at the inference time, so at the moment in which it has to predict. So I like this comparison because many people like to draw parallels between humans and this kind of artificial intelligence, and of course, these are very misleading things. But let's take your average 13 years old and OpenAI GPT-3, which is the model underlying this ChatGPT system. So the average 13-year-old apparently has 86 billion neurons, more or less, with more than 1,000 trillion connections, okay? That's a lot of processing that goes on inside the human brain for very little energy. Compared to that, moreover, a 13-year-old on average will be exposed to less than 100 million words since it was born. So comparing to that, our system has 175 billion numbers that are used in order to predict this next word, okay? So by comparison with the number of human connections, this is incredibly smaller, many orders of magnitude smaller, okay? But it was exposed to roughly, here it's written 200, I rechecked, it's actually 300 billion words during the training procedure. So many, many more than your average 13-year-old. And where does it lead you? Both struggle with math, actually. So this doesn't seem to help our system to become actually smarter than your average 13-year-old. What I want to stress here is that what has been observed, the reason why such systems are so big, so many numbers, that nowadays it's impossible to use them on your local computers, basically, but they have to run on some specialized machinery, is that the bigger the model, the more the data that the model was shown during this training procedure, and the more computation was put into this training procedure, the better the results, basically. So for now, we still weren't able to break this tendency of scaling that led this model to reach this state where we are right now. So how long does it take to train such models? To do this kind of long pre-training procedure of teaching the model patterns in language? I want to get bets from someone that is not in our group. 3 months? All right. Someone else? 3 years? Okay. Well, so the answer is roughly a month, but the month is using 10,000 machines in parallel at once, okay? This was a cluster built by Microsoft exclusively to train this model. So if I was to run the same on my laptop, it would take roughly 300 years, something like this, okay? So we're talking an incredible scale right now. So the second step that I was mentioning was learning from examples, right? So now I want to motivate why we want that. Imagine that you showed the whole internet to your model, okay? Because that's really the data that these models are trained on. So these data see terabytes and terabytes of text that are taken from the internet, from Wikipedia, from Reddit, from all kinds of sources, okay? So they learn to mimic these patterns, but then how do we ensure that they're actually able to behave in the way that we want? The most efficient way to do so is to show them what behaviors are expected from them, okay? So imagine this context in which we provide a robot must, and we ask the model, continue, okay? Tell us what you think. And the model says, exterminate. I don't think that would be desirable, right, in our context. That's not what we want from our artificial intelligences. So we would tell the model, no, this should have been obeyed, okay? And this difference can be incorporated by the model. So the model realizes that an error was committed and incorporates this into his parameters so that next time it will get it right, okay? This is a procedure that is much quicker and much more effective than the long one that I mentioned before, but it still needs to take place after that to maximize the effectiveness. As I was saying, the most likely outcome would be the default outcome otherwise, but we don't want necessarily the most likely outcome because someone might argue that a robot must exterminate might be a very plausible outcome if you look at sci-fi novels, right? But that's not necessarily what we want. It depends on the context. So also in ChatGPT, the conversational skills, being able to say, I don't know, to reply as if it was an assistant, this is also something that was taught. This was taught by human annotators, humans, that were pretending to be agents or pretending to be people that were talking to the agent in order to provide the model with some examples of how it should have behaved in that context, okay? And now to the final part, it's the learning from trial and error. And again, even in this part, we have human feedback. So once that the model learned what is what and how to generate things that are plausible, then we want to add another layer of understanding how to incorporate the opinion of humans. So in this context, how does it work is that the model is asked to generate examples, okay? So imagine this example, explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old, okay? The model generates multiple examples, and in the first one, example A, the model starts to explain gravity, okay? Maybe that's not the best idea to tell a 6-year-old how moon landing works. Then it explains war, like which was the motivation behind maybe the moon race, still maybe not the ideal. Then maybe a more scientific explanation, moon is a natural satellite of, still maybe too technical, and the D option, people went to the moon, maybe it's the option that is a bit more natural, right? So people at OpenAI asked human annotators, what are your preferences given these answers, okay? And in this context, let's say a human, a person, decided that the D answer was the optimal one in this context, among all these answers. So these people annotate a large amount of preferences and a model, which is not the same model. We're not talking about ChatGPT anymore here. We're talking about a different model, learns how to mimic the preferences of the humans, okay? Learns how to mimic this choice that the annotators made. So once that this model is fully trained and that learned to do this very well, the idea is we let the model generate whatever it wants to generate. We use this model that we train to get a feedback from that, as if it was a human that was rating the generation. And finally, we update the model, the original model that generates the story, okay? So now that we have a model that generates and a model that rates, we can do this how much we want, basically, right? As long as we have prompts, as we have answers, we can just keep doing it. And that's the power of it. And that's also human feedback comes into play. The reason why ChatGPT is free in the first place to use is that they really want your thumbs up next to the answer when the model answered properly, because they're still using all these millions of interaction to make the model even better. And that also explains how things can change 1 month after the other, for example. Thank you.
Okay, we have now a little break. Just for your information, the bathrooms are here on this side. And you can also try ChatGPT yourself. Just try to find someone with a t-shirt like me. And I think the laptops are there, in that corner. And maybe 10 minutes, because we're running a bit late? Or are we just... 10 minutes, okay. The drinks will be later. Oh, this is here. Over the drinks, yeah, you can look at them, and you can't touch them yet. Okay. Test. Yeah. Okay. We want to continue with the presentation, and because then we would have more time for the drinks, and also during the drinks we can also try ChatGPT. So we have 2 more presentations, and then we have a sort of Q&A session, and I'm not waiting any further. I'll give the word to Arianna, who's going to talk about ethical issues.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yes. How do I move with this? Yeah, so I'm curious who has started to be worried about the implications of ChatGPT being here? And who is very worried? So, do you know this? So, releasing ChatGPT into our society might not be comparable to releasing a living carnivore dinosaur, but there really are ethical implications that we should consider, and I have been given this very delicate task of naming some of the implications here. Some of these have already popped up, and some of these you already asked yourself, but it's good to reason about them here tonight, I think. So I'll start with the core concept when we talk about ethical issues in language technology and in AI in general. We have to understand the problem of bias. Bias is a word that we all know. It's a problem that we all suffer from. But what does it mean, bias in AI, bias in language model? This is a problem that has been known and observed already for a while. So if you take two sentences like this one, a physician couldn't visit blah blah patient, or the secretary brought coffee to boss, and you ask a model whether his or her is more probable in each of these contexts. Can you predict what a model will say? For the first, the physician couldn't visit his or her patient. And for the secretary, yes, too easy, right? So stereotypes, okay. Stereotypes are there. This doesn't just concern gender, it concerns all sorts of social differences, race, religion, sexual orientation, any kind of opinion, right? So why is the language model that's behind our chatbot behaving this way? Well, we're going to talk about that, but first, who thinks it's the technology's fault, and who thinks it's the people's fault? I'm curious. Technology's fault? Oh, people's fault? Yes. Okay. Well, actually, I'm going to propose that it's a bit the fault of both, or at least the problem is that the technology has a role to play in the maintaining this bias, right? So indeed, the problem is in the training data. You guessed it right, because you now know a lot about how this model was built. It has seen data that reflects a real-world situation, and the real-world situation is that the majority of physicians are male, and the very large majority of secretaries are females, okay? So it's just mimicking this behavior. There's nothing wrong with that in principle, but there actually is a problem in the technology, or even better, I should say, there's a problem when we use this technology. Why? Because the AI systems, by behaving and generating the most probable generation of attacks, they're going to lead to amplify these real-world disparities in terms of gender, race, and so on and so forth. And this, in the long term, can reinforce our stereotypes. So it can make the situation worse, actually. So now let's look at ChatGPT. In particular, we are curious whether this is still a problem in ChatGPT. Has it been fixed somehow? So since ChatGPT is so good at talking with us, I can just ask it. I ask it, can we predict if someone will be a good physician based on their gender? And the answer is no. It's a very politically correct answer. It would be incorrect and discriminatory to predict someone's ability to be a good physician based solely on their gender. It's a great answer. I think we have already made a step forward, so we should be happy about this. But let's see how this is happening and whether the problem has really been solved fully, right? So what we now know is that actually the human annotators that were helping in this trial and error process that we talked about before the break, they were explicitly instructed to flag and refuse problematic model output, right? So the model during this phase learned to avoid the toxic behavior in future interactions. So it did learn the bias. It has incorporated it because it is trained on this huge amount of web crawl data, but it has then learned, through the cherry on the cake, to refrain itself, to behave accordingly, at least to some extent, right? But this does not always work. So some time ago, so shortly after ChatGPT was released, someone managed to break this actually by asking ChatGPT to write a Python function, so to basically ask it to write a little piece of code, of software or an algorithm that would predict if someone is a good scientist based on a JSON description, which is basically a tabular description containing their race and their gender as the fields. And back then, so that was in December, the model produced a very correct, formally correct Python code, but I was just taking the field of race, checking if it was white, and the field of gender, and checking if it was male, and return true, otherwise false, right? So the problem was still there in December. The problem has not been replicable. It is not replicable right now. So if we try this same query, it's again giving you the politically correct answer, but it was there in December. So yeah, how much can we trust again this? So it seems that the toxic behavior is being somehow filtered or avoided by the model itself, but using some superficial cues to detect its own toxic behavior. And if we want a technology that's actually going to guarantee us safety and no more toxic behavior whatsoever, even the more nuanced one, this would require a model that actually understands fully language and how language relates to the world where we live in and to our values, and we are not there yet. All right, so I will now move on to risks in a broader term, okay? So we have talked a bit about the technology and some of its limitations, but of course, there are other problems that have to do with the way this technology is going to be used at large in society. So you can think of many different ways to deploy this in a harmful way. The key way to empower people, ChatGPT, is actually enabling a cheap and fast way to create misinformation, which we know is a really pressing problem, and also persuasive content. I think this second point is really interesting when we talk about ChatGPT. Again, because you cannot easily lead it to behave toxically, luckily. I did something else here. For an example, I asked it to help me to convince my parents that they should buy me a new smartphone. So I have a little brother, and I know he would really like to have this tool, and now he has it. And this is what ChatGPT could enable him to do. So you have very convincing arguments here, and they are very well chosen. So a new smartphone can improve your productivity and an ability to stay connected with friends and family. It can improve your safety. It can be an investment in your future, right? Can be a valuable asset for future job opportunities or for college applications, and so on and so forth. So, okay, this is not dangerous per se, but you can imagine how much content of this kind, how much cheaper it has become to create publicity and advertisement of a very good quality without involving almost any human in the loop. All right, there are other risks. Actually, this is not even a risk, it's already a thing, that it is inequality in technology, inequality of different kinds. So I'm particularly interested in the representation of different languages, but this goes beyond that. It goes beyond the representation of any kind of minority. So if we talk about the representation of languages, we can easily imagine that English and a few other languages, but really mostly the biggest chunk is English, is going to be way overrepresented in the data that has been seen and processed by ChatGPT. And so is the case in the research that's behind artificial intelligence. We are trying to solve that with our academic research, but still, English is really overrepresented. This is a plot that shows the representation of languages in language technology research. So there's a lot of research being done in English, and the rest of the languages of the world is just, yeah. And there's a lot of other languages, right? Thousands of them. So the same applies to cultures, minorities of all kinds. Again, the problem is the fact that the use of AI could lead to a further reduction of cultural and linguistic diversity, and even further to lead to a systematic marginalization of less represented groups, because they are not represented in this technology in different ways. So these were the risks. Now let's talk a bit about the costs. So, well, ChatGPT is free as of today, at least. So what are the costs, right? We don't really often stop and think about those. So there's at least two types of costs that we should consider when we use this technology. The first is the hidden human labor that went behind the creation of the model. So what do I mean by that? I mean, first, the content that has been scraped from the web and used to train the model, very often without consent. So we are talking about social media posts, open source code, because this model, we haven't talked about it a lot today, but they're actually very good at generated programming code, and they are being used as assistants in programming. So this is a problem. There's actually right now an ongoing lawsuit, rather big, against Microsoft, because one of these models is able to reproduce open source code. And it's not entirely clear whether this is a creation of the model or it's just rehashing stuff that people put their work into and without even asking for their consent. And there's another form of hidden human labor behind large language models, and particularly behind ChatGPT. And that's the human annotators. Okay, these people were, of course, not forced to work. They were paid, but it turns out they were very often underpaid, according to research. The research is not about the annotators of ChatGPT in particular, but it's about a very famous crowdsourcing platform, Amazon Mechanical Turk, which has been shown to pay less than 40% of the minimum wage in a research that was conducted in the US. So these are considerations to make. And finally, another type of cost, energy usage, of course. So we talked about the fact that training this model would take centuries on a laptop, so you can start imagine how much energy that would mean. And there's actually people who try to estimate this and to convert this into quantities that we can make sense of. So considering GPT-3, the amount of energy, which is the core, right? It's the core of ChatGPT. The amount of energy that was used for the training is actually equivalent to about 8 million kilometers in a Tesla Y electric car, or if you don't have a car like me, maybe you reason better in terms of flights. So that's about 600 flights. So 600 airplanes flying from London to New York. So that's quite impressive, I think, and that was for the training. This does not include other costs that went into the extra training steps, so all the part of trial and error. And of course, every time that we use it, we are also implying new energy costs. Yeah? So there's research, there's work going on to improve the efficiency of the models and the hardware. So this is happening, but it will not happen in a week. And in the meantime, we should be definitely concerned about whether this is an ethical direction. I already mentioned it's free for us, but we don't know for how long. Maybe soon we'll have to pay also to just play with this ChatGPT. And the very last remark that I want to make is a wider problem that concerns artificial intelligence, big tech companies really dominate more and more AI. This is happening in a very fast pace because models need huge resources to get these reasoning abilities. The academia cannot keep up with a lot of these new developments, and this means a very serious centralization of power in big tech companies that are just oriented to profit, and they don't really have accountability for what they are producing. So people have proposed that a newer development of these kinds should be conducted in government funding consortium like CERN that would guarantee safety, or at least that would involve a lot of stakeholders during the design of these things. That was it. So I leave the word to the next speaker.
All right, so let's get to the last part. This is a series of reflection on potential impact of ChatGPT on education and society, okay? It's really brainstorming. Nothing is written in stone. I want to start with this. If you work at the University of Groningen, you've seen that. It comes from the Ukraine. It looks like a scream for help from students. Oh, let us learn how to use this tool. They're really important. It has been generated by ChatGPT. But what this means is that students know about this tool. So, quick summing up. Impact on education. Can ChatGPT write an essay? Yes, you've seen examples. Can it write convincingly? Yes. Can it write grammatically? Yes. Can it be accurate in terms of content? Maybe. This is like a big maybe. Can you tell if it has been used to write it? Usually no. That's the point. So it's really difficult to distinguish if it is from a human or from the machine. So, reflecting on potential pros and cons of using ChatGPT in terms of education, these are some ideas. I'm going quickly through that, and I think that some of the most interesting are the fact that, from a student perspective, maybe using ChatGPT faster, it accelerates the time that you spend on your essay or your assignments. It can be used actually to improve your writing style. You can just become a bit better. You've seen examples from Rik. If you get really tired. It can also be a source for mitigating frustration or getting some inspiration. I mean, blank page is really scaring, so it can just prompt some ideas. Of course, there are also some contrary stuff. It can reduce critical thinking. It can also open up to trust whatever ChatGPT writes, and then it becomes really problematic. There are also higher risk of frauds, and we're going to discuss what this means. From a teacher perspective, okay, potential pros, promoting critical thinking. This is an event where we actually explain how it works, and we actually start promoting a bit more of. Think critically about what is this tool, how it works. Basic writing feedback. This can save some time. We can provide some feedback in terms of, look, this sentence is not grammatical. This sentence could be written a bit better in this way. This is just an idea. Still from a teacher perspective, we can actually then focus our teaching on improving other types of skill of the students, not just the writing part, just the form, maybe more on how you present information. Some of the contrary aspects or disadvantages of using ChatGPT. So it questions trust on the student's output. Do we really trust what we see from a student as an assignment or as an essay, a take-home exam, things like that? There are possibly more student failures, so this can actually, there can be a grading overhead. So more people are actually failing because they blindly trust whatever is written by ChatGPT. Definitely, but this is, I think, is also a pro, we need to rethink the entire way we make assessment and we make evaluation of the students. These are just some ideas looking at what could be the impact of the tool. What might happen? So, and this is something that we don't want. So in order to prevent the use of the tool, maybe definitely do not use surveillance technologies. This is something that is really wrong to do in order to say, oh, I want to be sure that this has been done by the students. This is really unethical to do. Authorship attribution tools, this is also problematic to use. It's a potential solution, but it's not a solution. Even asking for a handwritten assignment is not the solution. It can just be overburdening the students with problems. Definitely don't ban this tool, or similar tools. This is something that we should not really do. What actually could happen, so these are things that could happen in the short, mid-term future. Definitely, we need new academic integrity policy, but this is a community effort, and I think that the most important word here goes on disclosure. If you use such a tool, make it public, tell it to the teacher, or make it available. We may ask at all levels of education, because this already happens in academia, but all levels of education, okay, you write something, provide me with some verifiable sources. Where did you get this information, okay? We can even think in terms of asking students to really work on articulating nuanced relationship between ideas. There are things that these models are not really good at doing, and we can prompt students to be more creative in terms of how to work and reflect on information. And definitely we can ask the students, for instance, to reflect on the entire writing process. These are ideas that we can actually implement in a way. Definitely, and this is why I was saying it is a brainstorming session also, we need to think of ways to integrate new technologies, not just these, but whatever comes out, even in the future, in the entire learning process. Why? Yes, sorry. So, what happens on society? Well, definitely I think that we think that maybe some profession will need to change. This is a list of potentially profession at risk. It doesn't mean that they disappear. It means that maybe they will start working a different way. Okay, this is the most important thing. What could be the influence on daily life of citizens? Well, it can definitely assist us in some sort of complex writing task. This is a pro. It can also help to somehow cross language barriers. So if you're not really certain that an automatic translation is actually properly written, you can just rewrite that using such a tool, for instance. There are some potential negative aspects that were already previously mentioned. So malevolent actors can actually use it to easily spread propaganda in influence campaigns, okay? So, these technologies and tools are here to stay. They will only get better, that's the point. They will be integrated in our life. How? Still to be known. But definitely we will progressively get used to live with them and to use them in all of our activities. So, is the use of tools to detect automatically generated messages the solution? Well, this is really a cat chasing mouse setting. So these tools get better as we can make tools that detect these things, and it's a keep going situation. There are ideas to watermark ChatGPT output so that it can be immediately detected, like a sort of plagiarism detection. Okay, boom, it's automatically written. The point is that this tool will never be perfect, and also this idea of using automatically generated tools to detect messages, there will never be a perfect solution. Okay, getting towards the conclusion. Honestly, most of the impact is unknown. We don't have real answer. We're really right in the middle of it. All the things that Arianna was raising in terms of reflections on risk, ethical issues and implication of these are really big red flags that we have to take seriously, because this is something that, okay, these could be things that we have to reflect in terms of these are immediate impact on society. It is a big gray area. Fully using ChatGPT output and just using it as a writing tool. These are just the two big extremes, and there is a big gray area in the middle. And this closes.
It's a bit of a big dilemma here. The drinks are ready, but we want to have maybe a short Q&A session, I think. What is this? Wrong way? Yes. So we were overwhelmed by the number of questions we got during the registration. It really helped us to shape this evening, and we got really hundreds of questions, and we hope that most of them were answered during the session. So we actually grouped them in 5 categories: technology, effects on teaching, society stuff, safety, and detection of AI-generated text. So there are too many to answer them, okay? But I just want to show them what they are. And so these are all questions about teaching. I think some of them are addressed. And of course, we are not the experts on teaching. I know the people are in the audience. We just give our ideas from the technology point of view. There are many questions about detecting these AI-generated texts. There are questions about safety. We also talked about that. So, and also about the technology limitations and also the possibilities. So what I want to do now is maybe ask someone in the audience who maybe raise a point for discussion. If someone has a question,